Good morning, everyone. How are you? Thanks for coming out on this hot morning. Welcome to the live in-person and live Zoom worship service of the Unitarian Universalist Church of Riverside. Our doors are open and we will continue live streaming and posting these services on our YouTube channel for our virtual attendees. Thank you for remembering to come in an hour earlier this morning as our service hours begin at 9 a.m. in the months of July and August. I'm Grace Preuss, a member of the worship committee, and I will be one of your worship associates today. Other members of the worship committee you will hear from include Dinah Rowe, our church treasurer, Adam Wedeking, Social and Environmental Justice Committee chair, and our music producer and coordinator, Alec Peck, who will also be delivering the service today. We welcome you to join us on this Independence Day morning with an open mind and an open heart, and with muted electronic devices, please. We invite you to leave your anxieties and defenses at the door and trust that what happens in worship here is inspiring and powerful. Together, we affirm that this day and our being together can make each of us braver, more compassionate, and wiser as we begin a new day and a new week. Adam, who is joining us online this morning? Okay, we welcome you all online as well. Although our doors are open, the pandemic is not over. So while we are here, please keep your masks on and socially distance. We can speak in normal tones, but singing or chanting creates an increased risk of airborne exposure, so we ask you to refrain for the time being. We invite those of you in the sanctuary to sit back and enjoy listening to our songs. But for those of you at home, sing your hearts out. And now I invite you to sit back and take a slow, deep breath as we move into the worship hour. For our call to worship, you're welcome to read with me the mission statement of our church. Our mission is to foster a diverse religious community that celebrates life, affirms the individual, encourages spiritual growth and open thought, and works to advance social justice and environmental sustainability. This morning, we are pleased to welcome UUCR member Alec Peck on the topic, how would God manifest? A rational approach. Alec has been a practicing UU for 23 years and has a deep passion for the intellectual and spiritual challenges which arise from exploring the 6 sources of our living tradition. He was raised in a UU church, chosen by his father, raised Quaker, and mother, raised Jewish, though both are humanist in praxis. Alec recently spent 2 years studying natural science at, is it Creighton University, a Jesuit institution, is now completing his PhD at UC Riverside. UUism is built on many religious traditions which describe some type of theology, the most familiar being the idea of Judeo-Christian God. Each religious tradition offers some form which the spiritual world takes. For example, God, gods, spirit, etc. However, most UUs do not find any specific representation of God to be very convincing, and many identify as atheist or agnostic. UUism also instructs us to heed the guidance of reason in our spiritual journeys. In this sermon, we will try to apply reason and logic to deduce the possible forms which God, or the spiritual world, are possible. Alec will offer one possible conclusion in the societal implications. We have 2 lightings of sacred flames. The first is the occupied Indigenous Peoples Remembrance Candle. The second is the lighting of our own chalice, the symbol of our faith. We walk upon the traditional territories of diverse and sovereign peoples, the original people of this land who continue to cry out for justice and self-determination. This spot we occupy was first the sacred space of several groups of California Indians, including the Cahuilla, the Cupeño, and the Serrano. We, the Universalist Unitarian Church of Riverside, light this sacred flame as the stewards of this sacred and holy place. We are blessed with a space and opportunity to strive to live out our common principles, to bring justice, equity, and compassion into our daily lives, to resist all that threatens the earth and her people, and to be a part of a world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. Let these thoughts carry us forth as we journey and worship together. Today's reading of the chalice lighting is A Fire in the Universe by Sean Trapp. Our chalice reminds us of that fire within ourselves is the same fire that illuminates the universe. It is our reminder that all is connected, even though the space of the void is vast, and our experience here is but a blip in the cosmic timeline. This flame is our promise that in our smallness and in our short time on this earth, we live intently and deeply with love for one another, with honesty and integrity, to be guided by rational thought and critical thinking, and with a sense of shared responsibility. For as the late astronomer Carl Sagan reminded us, this pale blue dot is the only home we've ever known. Symbolic flame. Our opening hymn this morning is Wade in the Water. For those in the sanctuary, please sit back and enjoy the hymn, but please do not sing along. Tinka, friend, will accompany us in sign language. Thank you, Tinka. Thank you, Tinka. We have a tradition here at UUCR. We like to welcome those who are visitors or perhaps returning after some time away. But we know it can be uncomfortable to stand up and speak in front of others, and we won't ask you to do something we wouldn't do ourselves. So I'm going to choose some unsuspecting soul or call upon a willing volunteer who has been here a while to tell us your name and how you first found out about our church. We ask you to hold the mic close to your face and speak into it directly. and clearly so everyone can hear. Is anyone willing to relate their experience? No? Okay, then I have to pick an unsuspecting soul. Okay, I will pick Paula.
I've now,
There we go.
I am. I know I've been here around 10 years. My husband and I direct by his niece, and we're very happy.
Thank you, Paula. So if there's anyone else here who is new or who would like to stand and speak, and you are willing and able, please tell us your name, where you are from, and how you found out about this church. Okay. Adam, is there anyone online who would like to introduce themselves? Doesn't look like it. Okay. Probably too early. All right. So for new guests, our visitors book is in the parish hall. So please, before you leave, sign the book so that we know you are here and can let you know about upcoming events. For those online, the best way to get added to the mailing list is to email the church office at admin@uuchurchofriverside.org. Okay, technical glitches this morning, sorry. There are a few announcements we would like to share. During the service, we will mention several websites, email addresses, and phone numbers. At the end of the service, we will leave up a slide with all this information, and it is also available on our website. The monthly UUCR newsletter comes out the first of every month by email and per request by postal mail. If you have something you feel is newsworthy or would like to contribute, please email uuchurchofriverside.calendar@gmail.com or call the church office at 951-686-6515. If you would like to be added to our mailing list, please contact the church office. Now Adam will come up and speak to us about the Social Environmental Justice Committee.
Good morning. At our last meeting of the Social Environmental Justice Committee, we voted to start a subcommittee called CURE, C-U-U-R, the Concerned UUs of Riverside. That subcommittee is a committee that will be working on all of our on-the-ground mutual aid type stuff that we're doing. That's the pantry, the work that we're doing with the Riverside People's Free Market, and other things. The meeting for CURE will be on the first Sunday of the month, so that's today, at noon, next door in the annex, upstairs in the little Social and Environmental Justice Committee room, where we will meet, make sure that everything is stored correctly, and talk about what's going on this month. So if you'd like to join, again, this is a subcommittee of folks who are working on the ground type stuff. Our regular Social and Environmental Justice Committee meeting will be on the third Sunday of the month, where we talk about what issues we support and meeting with legislators and things like that. But as far as the on the ground type work, that's with the subcommittee CURE, and we will be meeting on the first Sunday, which is today, at noon in the annex. So if you'd like to join us over there, or find me after church. Thank you.
Okay, so here are our events. Let's see. Today at 3 p.m. after the service, there will be a 4th of July barbecue on the UUCR lawn. Hope you can join us. On the second Saturday, we are having the Saturday matinee at 4 p.m. in the church annex. We have yet to have determined a film that we'd like to see. I know a lot of you are going to be out of town, but if you'd like to join us for the Saturday matinee, we would appreciate some suggestions on what you'd like to see. So let me know that. Come up to me and let me know. Thank you. Oh, yes, it's supposed to be Saturday. So it's the 10th. Sorry about that, everyone. So, so the Saturday matinee is going to be on the 10th, which is the second Saturday. Thank you, Tinka. Joys and concerns. It is said that a joy shared is doubled and the sorrow shared is halved. Today is the first Sunday of the month when we share our joys and concerns with one another. First, I'm going to read the joys and concerns that I have received or know of before today. Okay, I'm not sure which one of these are new, but I'm going to read some of them that would say. So someone wrote, joy for all the beautiful people I've met this month, prayer for a quick healing, and lots of love to give and receive. There's a concern for the first responders in Florida and for the first responders facing disasters around the world, and joy for the vaccination progress. And those are what are written in the book this week or this month. Is there anyone out in the audience who would like to address a joy or concern? Okay, Pat.
Good morning, I'm Pat Colander. I want to share a joy. There was this kitten living in my yard that had an eye infection, and my granddaughter and her friend came to visit. And these 18-year-olds, of course, fell in love with this kitten. And so they encouraged me, so I took the kitten to a vet, and the vet said I had to quarantine. So for the past 2 weeks, it's lived in my bathroom. And it was interesting. I've never had a cat, so this kitten and I learned a lot about each other. But yesterday, some good friends of mine that had just lost their cat of 11 years took the kitten, and there are 3 little boys who are just mesmerized. So that's my joy.
Thank you, Pat. A lot of animal lovers in this congregation, I know. Yeah. Anyone else? Joy and concern? Maggie?
I don't know if the magic is. I just want to share about a year and 4 months almost. Yay. She just turned 21.
Wow, nice. 21 is a landmark birthday. Okay, anyone else? Okay, I think I'd like to add a joy. I know this is a very tumultuous time in our history, but Juneteenth was declared a federal holiday this year. And I think it's a first step toward facing our difficult history. And I hope this continues. Yes, Adam has one.
One, two, three. It's not from me. This is from online. From Zoom. Margaret Johnson says, I have a joy to share. In my hometown, visiting my family, I got to see my grandfather, the person who's responsible for my love of physics, and for the first time since the pandemic started.
Bill Casey will now place a stone in our water chalice in symbolic recognition of the joys and concerns shared.
Well, I had one as well myself.
Oh, I'm sorry, Bill.
It's reaching a little far. It's reaching a little far, and I may be ahead of myself. But just overall, when looking at the news, looking at how old arguments used to, it used to be that some of the arguments and the ideas that we had were seen as sort of out there. It may just be a thing of the moment, but certain ideas lasting and maybe making a deeper impact finally in the mindset of people when they realize, no, this isn't crazy. People should be treated in this fashion and not in that fashion. It's an overall feeling of making progress. Should be noted.
Thank you, Bill.
Rough. The hard times that I've gone through, it's glorious. The hard times for friends around. They're not there. Smooth, in good times, the things that reaffirm us and let us know we are on the way. A bit mild for situations where we can't tell the joy from the cancer. And for all the good times we have.
Thank you, Bill. May we remember those who have spoken, those they have named, and those we hold in silence in our hearts. Our hymn now is Spirit of Life. If you are in the sanctuary, I invite you to sit back, close your eyes, and listen.
Sing in my heart all the
Now Dinah Rowe, our church treasurer, will speak to us about sharing our treasure.
Thank you, Grace and Alec. This portion of our service is to support our beloved historic church. This can be accomplished in several ways. You may send your check to the church address, which will be shown. You may contribute using a QR code, which is also on the church website and in the newsletter. Stater Brothers Market gives our church a rebate, a portion of the cards that we purchase through the church, and I will have those with me each Sunday. We have a couple ushers come forward, and probably just need one for this aisle here. Yeah.
Our next hymn is From You I Receive. Please sit back quietly and enjoy.
From you I receive, to you I give, together we share, from this we live. From you I receive, to you I give, together we share, from this we live. From you I receive,
Now I'd like to invite Alec Peck up to the pulpit for his service. Thank you.
Thank you, Grace, and good morning. Our meditation today is Humanity's Psalm by Cynthia Fredo. Creator of life, source of all being, it was from the particles of the universe that you formed me, iron and carbon and phosphorus, mixed with energy, passion, and dreams. I was made in your image, says ancient scripture, made from the colors of the rainbow, made with bones straight and curved, padded with flesh, flabby and lean, nearsighted, farsighted, short-sighted, and long in vision. I was made in your image, says ancient scripture, made strong and tall, short and stout, born with hands, tender and fragile, aged with hands, gnarled and mature, large nose, small nose, crooked nose. Who knows the mathematical infinitude of your genetic possibilities? I was made in your image, says ancient scripture, made to give love and receive love. Your passion courses through my veins, and when I touch another human being in love, it matters not what gender ignites that flame. It matters only that the fire brings light into the darkened deadness of the world that cannot exist without love's transformative power. I was made in your image, says ancient scripture, but who are you? I need to know. I who have eyes that are brown and blue and green and hazel, I who am intellectually gifted and mentally challenged, I who speak the languages of the world and no language at all. I who know scientific equations and musical sonatas and know only the magic of the daily loaf of bread and the taunting sounds of racism and the mockery of my sexual orientation and a lack of respect for my aged body. I am all of these things and more want to know. Who are you that I am made in your image? I am, says ancient scripture. I simply am. I am the light of all being. I am the divine spark. I am the source of love, the most transformative power in the universe. All life is in my image, and I am in you, and you are in me, and I am your siblings. They too are in me. I am in your pain and your suffering, and I am in your compassion and joy. I am light and love, and hope and possibility, and so are you, creator of all life, source of all being. It was from the particles of the universe that you formed me. Iron and carbon and phosphorus, mixed with energy, passion, and dreams. Forgive me. Forgive me that you are everywhere, and forgot that I am everywhere. Thank you for reminding me of who I am. Amen. Let us now pause for a moment of silence. Oh, there it is. Yeah, everybody pull. All right. And maybe, yeah, full screen. That looks great, doesn't it? Okay, so get ready to put on your thinking caps for this one. We're going to be doing an intellectual discussion today about how God would manifest in our world, and we're going to be taking a rational approach, or so I claim. Oh, 1 second, one more thing to set up, just in case I want to scribble on my screen. So first, an easy question for UUs. Do you believe in God? Now, this image that I have here, this is the capital G God, the familiar Judeo-Christian Abrahamic concept. This is synonymous with Yahweh or Allah. And most people, UUs that is, in the US, this is a very popular image, but to most UUs, this is not extremely appealing. The idea of a bearded male figure who looks like a white man. But even if we take this to be some kind of shorthand for any sort of singular entity with divine power and a consciousness that's far beyond what you or I experience, this is still not something that's particularly appealing to most UUs. So what about something that's a bit more general or a bit more abstract? After all, this isn't the only way that humans have envisioned the spiritual world. We've got things like the Greek pantheon, and they have very vivid human depictions that we're familiar with. But in the mythology, really, Zeus is more often appeared as something like a ray of light or a swan that comes to, well, basically rape human women, but that's for a different sermon. And so they're not necessarily of human form, and it's an entire pantheon that control the machinations of the world. Something similar even to the more pagan idea of spirits that control the ideas of illness, weather, luck, and fate, etc. Or even something more general like the forces of the universe that we see in Taoist dualism. Or even just let's go totally abstract and say that God is perhaps just the concept of love or beauty, something that is completely intellectual, or even a more humanist interpretation that God is the sum of all humans, or somehow the sum of the whole universe altogether, getting more and more abstract, all of these possible ways that we might think about what God looks like. All of these, we just have so many options that we have to choose from. What are all these ways that God might look like? However, how does the spiritual world, this thing that we're imagining, actually manifest in our world? And it could be nothing. It could, in fact, this is an option that's particularly favorable. Agnostics and atheists tend to like the total abstractions or even just the absolute nothingness. And just as a curiosity, show of hands, does anyone in here identify as atheist or agnostic? Yeah, I had expected that there may be a few. And I think, and for the most part, I would say that I agree with many of those lines of thinking. And the main reason I think that people think this way is that it's an appeal to logic, which is one of our sources. I mean, it just doesn't really make sense, this idea of an all-knowing, omnipotent God. It seems like logic should somehow limit the possible forms that God should be able to take. And from a scientific perspective, there's no evidence. I mean, if God were perhaps a ray of light or a swan that came down to impregnate women, then we definitely have some kind of tangible evidence for that kind of thing. And so these ideas of logic and reason seem to rub up against our idea about what form that God might take. But how can we address this in some logical or rational way? As I mentioned, I say that the guidance of reason and the results of science are our fifth source in UUism. And I want to say, how can we address this question scientifically? What does God look like? Or more generally, what is God like? I mean, if you claimed that you were God, or say that this bell were God, I would say, no, it's not. Where's the radiant light beams? And it doesn't even perform any miracles. But can God be contained within certain items? Or does God somehow emerge irreducibly? And if so, then from what? Scientific questions are an inherently agnostic way of addressing this. Because to ask scientifically, we're saying that that we might not know if something like God exists, but if God does, then what form would God take? How would we know when we're looking at it? What forms can God take, given that we have all these logical constraints that our universe seems to enforce on us? And also, just as a note, for the rest of my talk, I'll be using the word God to mean any sort of spiritual, mystical, or metaphysical concepts. And I think only small semantic changes would be needed to adjust the language from talking specific about something that sounds like a singular entity God to mean something like a more general spiritual world. And so with that in mind, I'd like to try to venture into the world of logic and reason and address this question about the forms that God can manifest in. So let's start by beginning our tool set a little bit. So first, rationale in a nutshell. We think that we know things. That is, the rationale all works based on a basis of assumptions. We have to take some set of ideas that we assume to be true, given some conditions, some setup, or some question, and then given those basic assumptions that we're willing to assume are true, we can then use the process of logic to arrive at some kind of conclusion. And logic is, well, formally, it's a strict set of rules about what you're allowed to do with information. And there are three fundamental laws which are mind-numbingly obvious. Things like this first one, this law of identity. P is P. A thing is a thing. Okay, great, really helpful there. Or the last one, something is either a thing or it's not that thing. It seems like it's almost mind-numbingly obvious, but it turns out that these rules are extremely powerful and allow you to create ideas that you're more familiar with when you think of something like logic, such as if A implies B and B implies C, then that means that A implies C. And this process means that we can assign this idea of truth values. We say that if A and B have to be true for something to be C, let's say for something to be God, it has to produce both radiant light and perform miracles. If you don't do both of those things, well, you're not God. That's the logical process in a very basic nutshell. And these, as a side note, with the adventures in recent decades into quantum logic, it seems that even this idea of things have to be either something or definitely not something isn't even strictly necessary to form a logical framework. And that's perhaps going to be an important thing to keep in mind, since the idea of God is something that we often see in many traditions, often takes on paradoxical natures in many forms. But this rational process, in many ways, is kind of like a game, in that we get to pick the rules and we have a specific goal in mind. And then we want to know, are we able to reach that goal given the constraints that we have, given our assumptions and the constraints imposed on us by the system of logic? And we use these logical questions to find out what is true given those basic assumptions. Now, that means that the truth that we're arriving at is only as good as the assumptions that we're putting in. The technical term for this is that we're using an axiomatic system. And what we're trying to ask here is that we have this fundamental assumption that let's just presume for fun, for a moment, that God will take some kind of form. And let's say that that's definitely true. So then, if we assume that that's true, then what forms is God going to be able to take in our universe? What are we actually going to be able to see? However, this question alone is not enough for us to be able to make any continued deductions. We need to know a little bit about what we're looking for, which is a bit of a sticky subject. What kind of properties do we really expect God to have? Now, we can't get too specific with what we're looking for, such as if we demand that God has to appear male, then we are going to be locked into that natural assumption. These are going to be cultural expectations. Even the idea of light beams and miracles, those are purely cultural expectations. And how do we know when we've gotten something that's more generally true, something that is as fundamental really as you can get, and not something that we just expect based on the culture that we live in today's Western society? And to some degree, I've looked at this by looking at the commonality of the items that we've used in our UU sources. Since this is, after all, a practice, an intellectual exercise for UUs, I thought that was a reasonable and reasonably general basis to start from. And I've tried to sum up the ideas of what UUs look for in God into roughly three completely overlapping categories and these things are somewhat arbitrarily divided up into these idea of a personal relationship, the origins, that is, of us and the universe, and of the general existence as well. Starting with some of those personal properties of God, when I spoke to some of our congregation members, and indeed when I look at a lot of UU text, most of the talk about God is about love. After all, just look at this sappy image that I found online. Love creates miracles, heals wounds, purifies lower energies. We have this idea that love is a spiritual process, and romantic love is inherently divine in some way. That God gives us this sense of inner power and a connection to the universe, something that connects our inner universe to the external universe that we experience. And it's directly accessible to everybody, something that is a personal experience, again, that you don't, there are certain schools of thought that you require a church to access God. However, even in those schools of thought, God itself is usually a more general concept that you can access in some way directly. God is this support that never fails you. We see this is sort of hinting at this paradoxical nature in that somehow this idea of God is both inherent to you, but also completely beyond you in some way. And in general, we usually think of our emotional and subjective experiences as not really contributing to the rational process, but we still learn, but I think we can still get some valuable insight from looking at these aspects, in that we see that one thing is that God has to have many personal representations and has to be described sometimes paradoxically in that it has the same interaction with everybody, and yet every single person has their own unique conception of God. And as a side note, there are many religious traditions which consider God to be the ultimate source of morality and what it means to be a good person and what it means to make you a good person. And this is a big part of our faith as well, what it means to be a good person. But there are also many traditions which derive morality not directly from God, but rather from our lived experience. And indeed, this also speaks to our tradition. It is how we interact with our fellow humans that dictates the reasons of morality. And so as a side note, you might consider also that God should have these moral properties, but I think this is also in some way related to this personal relationship that we have and what it means to be a good person. So then, what about the origins of the universe? Creation myths are one of the most recognizable forms of any theology. We want to explain how the world got to be here and our continued existence in it. Why is there a universe, and why is life in it? We expect that any God should be consistent with the Big Bang cosmology that we've seen from observational astronomy. However, this is just a theory that approximates how the world works, and it's a theory that has some serious problems with it, in my opinion, and I'd love to talk to you about that, but there's not time to do that in this talk, so maybe save that for the questions if you're really interested. But we also want to be able to explain the origins of complex systems. So we say in this in the scientific theory of evolution, if we have some life, then it's easy for us to get more life. However, but it seems like life sort of spontaneously was created, and we have these ideas of the laws of entropy, which perpetuate the universe as it is, but don't really provide any mechanism to allow all of these wonderful complex systems to emerge. And we want to be able to describe the universe on some fundamental level, something that's completely independent of where and when you are, independent of space and time, even perhaps a priori to all of space and time, existing before the Big Bang, and somehow describes these unbreakable laws that are that you simply cannot break, and again are a priori to all physical things. Now, forgive me for going through these things. These are all concepts that you've seen before. I just wanted to run through them to contextualize this idea, since I often saw that when I ask people what God is, it's hard to really concretely formulate what is this image that we have in our head. So this final topic that I want to talk about in terms of what God is like is this experience of existence. We have this fundamental mechanism by which the world works, some sort of basic rules for how things work, sort of the laws of physics or the laws of chemistry. And we see this fascinating process where out of physics, we see that chemistry emerges. And from chemistry, there's biology that emerges. And from biology, there emerges consciousness. And each of these scientific theories is unable to explain the emergent properties of the one above it. And so we somehow get we have to use all of these rules to explain all of these different levels of our existence. But we want, and we experience this intense inner universe because of this emergent consciousness at the end of this chain. There's this external universe that we experience, but an internal universe that we use to reconcile it. And it seems that life is very different than non-life, especially conscious life. The universe, we have this whole inner universe that we experience every day. And since we are the universe, this is in fact the universe observing itself. On some level, we are hydrogen wondering what it is. There is some complex function. There are all these complex systems that we see, and they function completely consistently, and yet they appear to be paradoxical. Here's just a few examples. We expect God to be both fundamentally basic and yet infinitely complex. We expect it to be inherently understandable and yet never truly understood. It should be directly accessible and yet completely beyond us. And God should, as mentioned before, should somehow be independent of morality and yet also this source of love that we feel. And so we've now got this big puzzle of all of these properties that we want to expect. And a lot of them are these very abstract philosophical ideas. So like we want God to be able to describe the physical laws like entropy and gravity. We want God to exist a priori to the physical universe. We want God to be paradoxically simple and yet complex. God should have many equally valid representations, and somehow God should be directly and personally accessible to us on some conceptual level. Now, here's all of these things, and it seems like certainly there's nothing physical person or being that could really truly satisfy all these properties. Even something like, I think an amusing idea I've seen is perhaps helium itself is God, but this doesn't, and this has some of the properties that are appealing. Sort of everything is made out of hydrogen and helium at some level, but it doesn't really exist a priori to the universe. It's still made of physical things. But I still think that there is some answer, which is perhaps boringly obvious, but also elegantly simple. I think that it's kind of staring us in the face, really, that mathematics seems to have all of these properties that I've listed here. And there's a long history of trying to reconcile the nature of math and the relationship to God, especially among Christian theologists. But maybe it's really just that simple. Maybe God simply is all of math. There are physicists who have claimed that the universe doesn't just have mathematical properties, it has only mathematical properties. Math, or God, is totally non-physical and yet manifests in the physical world. We can count things in numbers. We see the Fibonacci numbers and the golden ratio appearing in sunflowers and exponential growth in almost every natural process. You need only your mind to directly access math and God. You have absolutely no hope of truly understanding math or God, although, to be honest, we already knew that. And math and God can be found in every emergent system and can describe everything. Math and God is incredibly abstract and yet somehow linked to the very fundamental things of the universe. Math and God can have infinite and equally true, sometimes incompatible representations, as we've seen in the representation theory that we use to describe the quantum physics of our very universe. We see that within complex systems, there is simplicity, and within that simplicity, there is yet more complexity. We are driven by simple mechanisms which are themselves complex. We believe that the proton is a fundamental particle, and we have all of these highly mathematical physical theories to describe it, and it's so fundamental that we call it a fundamental particle of the universe. But it turns out that as we've looked at it in more detail in recent years, we actually have no goddamn clue what's going on inside that thing. It's a complete mystery, another topic which I'd be happy to talk to you about, but something that I don't have time for. but we see that there is all this immense complexity, even in much more simple systems. There's a number game that children can play with these numbers called happy numbers that have this particular property with their digits. And numbers are either happy numbers or they're not. And so every happy number that's not a happy number, it turns out feeds into this natural structure, which some people lovingly call the melon coil, where if I start perhaps here at 53, I can wind my way down through each of these numbers up here. And then if I end up in here, I end up in this coil where I'm stuck forever. And every single number, every whole number ends up feeding into this coil here, or it's a happy number in the happy number tree leading down to 1. There is this conjecture by a fellow named Goldbach, which is famous because it says something that's very easy to understand. We say that every even number, bigger than 2 that is the sum of 2 prime numbers. Here's just a few examples right here. And indeed, even a grade schooler can see that this is obviously true. If you take any number, you'll quickly find many, many ways of representing it as 2 prime numbers. And yet, it is impossible so far to prove this. It is absolutely beyond all of our mathematical tools to prove Goldbach's conjecture is actually true for all numbers, because math itself is fractal-like. The Mandelbrot set, shown here, is one of the most well-known fractals, a snowman shape with infinitely complex edges, and yet it's actually governed by this intensely simple equation here, which has just 2 variables with symbols that you probably recognize. And my favorite fractal, the dragon curve, to me it feels like a trick that got played on us by God, where you take a right angle, and if you take this segment and you take it and you turn it into a right angle, and you take each line and you turn it into a right angle, and you do that again and again and again, eventually you see you got this weird square that looks like a solid shape, and yet this line never intersects itself. Never in this process will you ever get a line that overlaps. And as you keep going on to infinity, you get this curving shape that is very reminiscent of something lizard-like, giving its name the dragon curve. All of the immense complexity of general relativity can be encapsulated by an incredibly simple equation. Written here, it's incredibly compacted, just g mu nu is equal to t mu nu. And it's a very simple representation, which is just one of many possible representations for how the theory of gravitation works. But it just says that the shape of gravity is dictated by the shape of matter, and the distribution of matter is dictated by the shape of gravity. It's a chicken and the egg situation, but it's true. This happens in our world. This is how gravity really works. And we've seen that one of my favorite quotes by physicist Hermann Weyl, symmetry, as wide or as narrowly as we may define its meaning, is one idea by which man throughout the ages has tried to comprehend order, beauty, and perfection. This is Emmy Noether, whose theorem describes a fundamental link between the geometrical, mathematical symmetries of our universe, the fact that if I spin around, I'll end up facing the same direction as where I started. These actually give us the exact physical properties which we observe in matter on a quantum level. And I show you these equations here. And it's very strange, especially to people who are less familiar with math. I mean, there's only one number in here, and it's a 0, and it's way down there. Now, I'm not showing this equation because I'm hoping that you'll grasp its exact meaning. I show it to you more like I might show you some Latin scripture. Again, not because I expect you to understand, but because it is holy. And I think the easiest response to this is, but math, really? That thing that I hated in school? And I'd say, yes, really. And I'll come back to this point in a minute. There are a few common issues that people have with math. That math is anti-art, anti-creative, because you're either right or you're wrong. Now, here I've put an equation, which is wrong, where I've put that 1 + 1 is equal to 0. Did anything happen to me? Was I smited? No. Math, God is forgiving to you. And it turns out that you are allowed to make the rules. What is right and what is wrong is dependent on context in math and often in morality. if we can say that 1 + 1 is equal to 0, and it turns out that what you've done is you've discovered binary, which is how this wonderful device functions in the first place. And so this in itself is some form of miracle. Math can appear to be rigid and inflexible, but the truth is that the rules of math are all what you make them to be. They can appear inflexible because math is already all of the rules that you can possibly think of. Then people also say that, well, math is too hard. And well, I never claimed that understanding God was going to be easy. And I'm often I'm reminded of this idea that someone proposed. We have this idea in art that I can look at a beautiful painting and comprehend its beauty, and I don't need to be a skilled painter in order to do that. I don't need to be a skilled musician in order to appreciate a piece of music. And I think the same can absolutely be said of mathematics. Your ability to perform mathematics is completely independent of your ability to bask in its glory. But also, math is too simple. Math is never going to be able to explain things like love and consciousness and things like that. This equation here is the quantum field theory equation, and it explains some pretty damn complicated systems. And this is just calculus. Calculus is a branch of mathematics that any non-physicist mathematician barely pays any attention to in today's modern day. There are all kinds of possibilities in the realm of math, and I've used a lot of physics examples because that's the kind of math that's applied in our real world. But math is not physics, and unlike physics, math and God are not bound by the limitations of our universe, or by the limitations of calculus, or by the algebra that you were taught back in elementary school. A couple of loose ends that I want to address quickly. First, God is love, and there's this idea and God is acceptance, and it's love for oneself and others, and that God loves you. And one of my favorite quotes, that the greatest thing you'll ever learn is just to love and be loved in return. But math, and God should fill me with joy, but math fills me with discomfort, and depending on your experience, maybe some contempt. As a side note, this is another thing that's in common with capital G God. God should be personally inspirational, and math might be inspirational to me, but it's definitely not magical or inspirational to most people. But frankly, I don't know if God really cares. God is a force of nature, which is totally beyond our control and beyond our consideration. And maybe there is some way in which math God allows you to experience joy. But unlike Christian God, who demands your worship, you are not required to derive spiritual salvation through math. And there's also one philosophical issue, in that I pulled a bit of a trick on you. We started this conversation by saying that we were going to use a logical approach. We started from fundamental assumptions, and from those we said that the manifestation of God should follow mathematical constructs. In other words, if God follows mathematical constructs, God can only be mathematical constructs, because logic itself is defined as a mathematical framework. And this is the kind of paradox perhaps that we expect of God. If God and math indeed make up all things, then of course whatever language we use to describe it must itself be made out of God or math. There's an additional detail about this, that there's this fellow, Kurt Gödel, who has a serious problem with axiomatic systems. He's given us Gödel's incompleteness theorem, for those who are more in the know about mathematics in the audience. This really pulls into question the universality and self-consistency of mathematics, which is something that we really take for granted, and something that we kind of took for granted in our discussion here. Since formal logic is itself axiomatic, we may find yourself in a strange situation where you can have something which must be true according to your assumptions. However, it's also impossible to prove. Now, this itself does not, I think, scar the perfection of math. And I think it's a beautiful mystery that we have to unravel. Now, where does this leave us? I mean, what is my point? And what is the point of this interpretation that I've given you? I think at some level, this is all kind of obvious. I've said a lot of obvious things in the last 20, 30 minutes. The point is really, I think, the simplicity itself, that God simply is all of mathematics. There's a long history of philosophizing about this relationship between God and math, and scientific theories are all about minimizing our assumptions. And it feels like it, and on some level, it just feels like there is some truth to this interpretation, something that I can feel in my gut, which again, by our UU sources, is something that we're told to listen to. Now, what about, is this a helpful interpretation? I actually think not really. I don't think this is necessarily helpful to you. I don't think it's that knowing this idea or knowing these facts is really necessary to understand God. And knowing it might change your perspective on the world, but I don't know if this in and of itself can bring you any closer to the divine, although learning some actual math might, if that is indeed your goal. How might we get from this idea of math, this intensely abstract concept, to everything that's meaningful to us? God is hugging a crying child. God is finding peace with yourself. God is standing up against injustice. Coming to understand the mathematical nature of God will not accomplish any of these things. However, I don't think any orthodoxy really would. Which brings me to some of the social implications that I think are incredibly prudent given this interpretation. Because the state of math education is not very good. There are a lot of serious problems with the way that math is taught, because the math of God has to be interpreted by the word of man. Math education has a race problem. Math education has a gender problem, and math education has a class problem. There's an unparalleled awe and fulfillment in mathematical discovery, and all of that beauty is being lost to missed opportunities. One famous mathematician, Ramanujan, was born into poverty in India, and his immense contributions could have been many times greater if he had the resources to cultivate his gift from an earlier age. And it's impossible to know how many Ramanujans are lost to each generation due to prejudice and privilege. Many of these issues fall on people like me, the scientists and mathematicians, but I also ask you to consider this to be a pressing social issue. I'm asking you to encourage your daughters and nieces. Tell them that they have the power to profess the language of God, that there are many resources which use modern female roles which you can access, and I've provided some links on the screen here. We need to acknowledge that our fallible teaching methods are not the universal laws of God. And some of these, as I mentioned, these websites have some great resources for women in STEM and for people who care about women in STEM. Math, for me, has shown me the glory of God, and that is the kind of salvation from which nobody should be discouraged. Now, great. Our benediction is Blessed with Questions by Ma Teresa Tet Gastillo Gallardo. Some came here today to be blessed with answers in a tumultuous world. Let us hope too, however, that many of us have been blessed with questions to direct us with clarity of mind, to steer our logic towards kindness and justice always. Namaste, Amen, and blessed be. Our closing hymn today is This Is My Song. For those in the sanctuary, please sit back, close your eyes, and listen quietly. Thank you, Tico.
is my song, O God of all the nations, a song of peace for lands afar and wide. This is my home, the country where my heart is. Here are my hopes, my dreams, my holy shrine. But other hearts in other lands are beating with hopes and dreams as true and high as mine. My country's skies are bluer than the oceans, and sunlight beams on clover leaf and vine. But other lands have starlight too, and clover, and skies are everywhere as blue as mine. Oh, hear my song, now God of all the nations, a song of peace for their land and for mine.
Thank you, Alec Peck, for sharing your valuable time and insights with us this morning. It is sincerely appreciated, and we look forward to hearing from you again. We are going to have about 10 to 15 minutes Q&A with Alec following this service. Please be aware that this will be included on the video that is posted. This is a transition for us, and we're trying to figure out how to combine live and Zoom. So please be patient and we'll figure it out. I think the best way that we've come across is that if anyone has any questions, they could come up here on the pulpit and speak their questions into the mic. So do we have any questions?
I'll use this as a symbol since you mentioned it earlier.
It could be God.
Yeah, especially since there's an idea called transcendence and immanence, which we pagans had to really lean on heavy, because every time we said that God is immanent, this bell, this place, this time, this sound. And if you can't see, and maybe if you talk to yourself hard enough, you can see the radiance coming off of it. I don't know. But people would say, where is this pagan, easily breakable item that you revere? Because they were basically working for monotheism, and they wanted to prove the strength of God by crushing this thing, which I could do with my own hand. But so there was also, see, God is immanent. God is outside anything you can do. And thus, since we have crushed your God, you will then worship ours. And the idea that pagans had to deal with was an idea of God. The gods must therefore be transcendent and immanent, which frankly, they ended up sort of adopting part of that too. Ties into the second thing, which is more the question. The two heavyweight runners that last I checked as a non-math major were quantum and string. Quantum allows for momentary hiccups in reality, and everybody who's getting the tail kicked by regular reality is really hoping for an exception to get a restart. String theory works under the idea that there's this wall of harmony and intersecting laws with less hiccuping. And it was, I think, designed because the quantum guys were saying, you can't get any more precise than yeah. And they were saying, oh, then why am I paying my scientists? Whereupon somebody came up with string theory and said, yeah, we can harmonize it all. No empty spots. So since I've run into scientists who really get unhappy when reality has to take a break, they don't like the quantum vacation. Are you one of the people who can live with quantum hiccups? Or are you one of the people who needs that harmony extended through, because it's an extension of what the heck you do for a living? I'm sorry for the length of that.
No, thank you. And I'm actually going to take some quick notes so that way I can make sure that I say all the things that I want to say. No, thank you. So first, you made a great point about my callback to my claim that perhaps this bell might have some of God's properties. And I mentioned particular miracles and radiant light. And I would say that there are a lot of people who perform miracles. That's an easy one to identify. And so, from a mathematical perspective, when you ring this bell, there are all kinds of ways of describing the ways that the sound waves emanate from this point. And again, by the magic of math and physics, go from this point here to you, and in your mind generate this idea of a ringing bell. And I can form all of these images in your mind simply by sending these frequencies through the air. You mentioned as well string theory and how it attempts to reconcile quantum physics. I think string theory is an interesting point in that I'm actually not a big fan of string theory personally. It is still a contentious topic in the physics community. I think it's somewhat tautological in a way, in that it proposes many possible mathematical constructs that the universe can follow. And the detractors of it say, well, by sheer chance, obviously you're going to get the right one because you've simply guessed that every single possible mathematical construction might be a possible universe. However, this is actually a philosophical idea proposed by some theoretical physicists. Max Tegmark in particular is a well-known proponent that any mathematical construct actually is itself an entire universe, that our universe exists because of a set of mathematical constructs that allow for things like particles and mass and momentum and position. But none of these things are necessary. And in fact, any mathematical construction, even the Boolean ring, which makes up the 0 and 1s of binary, in itself is inherently some sort of mathematical universe in and of itself. But your primary question was about quantum interpretation. There's all this quantum weirdness that goes on, all this stuff that we just cannot explain in terms of classical physics and our day-to-day experience, all this quantum weirdness. In particular, just as one example, I would say that I'm not particularly bothered by quantum weirdness, but perhaps in a non-intuitive way. When we first indoctrinate young physics students into quantum physics, we tell them that you should start by just using the method of shut up and calculate, that you're not going to understand why any of these quantum equations work. You just have to do them and see that after you did them, you got the right answer. Therefore, obviously it worked. Now what are you gonna do? So, and then you just have to somehow reconcile that through your physics career. But I actually, and there are a lot of my physics colleagues who find these mathematical interpretations very difficult to grapple with. This idea of spin that is not spinning, or this idea that an object cannot point in a specific direction or have a defined position or momentum. It's somehow fuzzy. You can sort of, if you look, you're used to being able to look at an object and it's definitely there. You can tell exactly where it is. But it turns out that no matter how hard you squint at a quantum object, it'll always be fuzzy. It'll always be a little vague about where it is. And in fact, the harder you squint, the more vague it gets in some ways. And It's quite strange and quite paradoxical. And we say, well, particles aren't supposed to behave that way. Particles are supposed to be there, and I'm supposed to know where they are. And well, I just don't have a problem with saying particles are fuzzy. Particles are, you don't have a defined momentum. You have this fuzzy lump in, we call position momentum space. And it's not a defined point in this phase space. It's this messy lump. And when you observe it, that lump changes shape in some ways in response to your observations. That's another one of these tenets of quantum physics that people don't like, but that's just how it is. It's just a fuzzy blob. It's a fuzzy soup that we're swimming through, a fuzzy quantum soup. And that's the truth. You can take that one home. That was a long-winded answer to a long question. And if you don't want to stand up, you can say your question and I can hear you and I'll repeat it for the audience. Grace? Oh, thank you. Oh, thank you. I did work hard on the visuals, so I'm glad that they communicated. I wasn't sure if my idea was really going to communicate. I was thinking a couple nights ago, does this make sense? Are they going to see the connection that I'm trying to draw here? Does any of this make sense? Thank you, Grace. Yes, existence and life is fuzzy. Namaste, amen. I think we have some events today to get to. Great, thank you.